All right, today we're going to dive into something pretty wild, a tactic that's been used for centuries to get around the rules. It all comes down to changing a simple label. It's a kind of loophole that's hiding in plain sight, and you'd be amazed at how it's being used right now.
So to get us started, here's a little riddle that gets right to the point. When is a sword not a sword? Now this isn't just a silly word game. The answer actually pulls back the curtain on a really clever historical workaround that, believe it or not, laid the groundwork for some very modern strategies.
And the answer is, when it's a großes Messer. That's German for big knife. Now look at this thing. It's basically a sword, right? Same length, same function. But the critical difference, the absolute genius of it, wasn't the blade. It was the handle. A sword has that big, heavy pommel at the end. The großes Messer, though, was built with a simple grip, just like a regular knife. And that one tiny design change, that was the loophole.
And here's where it gets so clever. Because the way it was built, its construction, technically made it a knife. It was legally allowed in towns and cities, where swords were completely forbidden. It walked like a sword and talked like a sword, but its label said knife. The label literally changed the rule, letting people carry a massive weapon right under the noses of the authorities. So that little history lesson, it's the perfect setup. Let's fast forward to today and see how this exact same idea, using a category label to get around the rules, has evolved into a sophisticated and very intentional strategy. Okay, so what do we actually call this? Well, the formal term is exploiting category labels. It's all about using a very specific name for something on purpose, just so you can dodge the rules that apply to a different category. And let's be clear, this is no accident. It's a calculated move to play by a set of rules that works better for you.
And you might think this is just some clever little trick found by someone on the factory floor. Nope. As this quote makes clear, these moves are decided way up at the top. We're talking CEOs, legal teams, the whole C-suite. It's a top-down strategy, often put in place by the very people who tell everyone else to follow the rules.
All right, so where's this happening right now? Well, it's pretty much everywhere, from the stuff in your shopping cart to the drugs in your medicine cabinet. Let's just run through a few modern examples.
You've probably seen this stuff a million times without even realizing it. You know, like splitting one big bill into two smaller ones to sneak under a tax limit. Or doing the absolute bare minimum of work in Europe just to slap on that premium Made in EU label. Or, my personal favorite, vegan water. I mean, come on, it's just water. And of course, putting a tiny product in a gigantic box. All of these use a label or the way something is presented to make you believe something that just isn't true.
Let's really break down that Made in EU thing, because it's a perfect example. Look at this chart. A company might do, say, 95% of the actual work in Asia. Then they ship it to Europe to do the last 5%, maybe just putting it in the box. But that tiny step lets them use the Made in EU label, and boom, they can charge a 20% premium. The label screams European quality, but the reality of how it was made tells a totally different story.
And you know, the label isn't always a word. Sometimes the package is the label. You've seen it, right? That huge bag of chips that's mostly air, or a fancy box of chocolates that's half empty. The packaging itself is a physical label. It's designed to take up more space on the shelf, to look bigger and better, and to make you feel like you're getting more for your money, even when you're not.
Now, let's look at a much more complicated case, the popular drug Ozempic. A while back, regulators officially declared a shortage. That one word, shortage, was like turning a key in a lock. It triggered a special rule that let compounding pharmacies make their own versions of the drug, which they normally can't do. It was a way to make sure patients could still get it. Then, once the manufacturer said the shortage was over, that label got removed and poof, the loophole was closed. So get this, the actual medicine, the molecule, was exactly the same the whole time. Nothing about the drug itself changed. The only thing that changed was its official status label. It went from available to in shortage, and then back again. And just flipping that label completely changed the rules for who could legally make it.
Okay, so we've looked at shopping and regulations. But what happens when this kind of label swapping game gets into the world of science? Well, that's when the stakes become literally life and death. A bad label here can have absolutely devastating results.
Yeah, let's rewind to 2020. Peak pandemic. The world is desperate for a cure for COVID-19. Then, a massive study gets published in the Lancet, which is one of the most trusted medical journals on the planet, and it had the ultimate seal of approval, the most powerful label in science, peer-reviewed.
So this study from a company called Surgisphere comes out, and it's a bombshell. It concludes that the drug hydroxychloroquine wasn't just useless, it was actually dangerous. Now, this flew directly in the face of what other respected researchers like Professor Raoult in France were saying. He claimed it was safe and effective. So you had the scientific community completely split with two huge contradictory claims.
And the fallout was immediate. I mean, look at this timeline. Because the study had that trusted peer-reviewed label, the World Health Organization literally stopped clinical trials of the drug all over the world. But then, scientists started digging. They realized the data behind the study was totally private and couldn't be checked. Within just a couple of weeks, the whole thing fell apart, and the Lancet had to retract the study. The WHO had to do a complete 180. The global search for a treatment was thrown into chaos because of one bad study.
And there it is. It's the big knife all over again, right? The system put its faith in the label, peer-reviewed, but it couldn't actually inspect the construction underneath, which in this case was the data. The label was trusted, but the reality it was supposed to represent was flawed, inaccessible, and ultimately just plain wrong.
So, okay, we've got a medieval weapon, a modern drug, and a global scientific crisis. What's the thread connecting all of this? What's the big takeaway here? How can you actually use this idea?
This table really just puts it all together. Look at the pattern here, the reality of the situation. A big weapon, the same drug, sketchy data, it doesn't change. But a carefully chosen label like knife or in shortage or peer-reviewed is used to completely sidestep the rules. It is the exact same playbook, used over and over again.
And that brings us to the core lesson, which is actually incredibly simple when you boil it all down. This isn't random. It's just what people do. People and organizations will always find a way to play with labels to get around rules that are based on categories.
And let's not forget where this stuff comes from. This isn't an accident. It's a conscious choice, a strategy that is planned and given the green light at the very top of an organization. It's not a bug in the system, it's a feature.
So I'll leave you with a question that you can take with you and apply pretty much anywhere. The next time you see a label on a product, in the news, anywhere, just ask yourself this. The label says one thing, but what does the construction say? What's really going on underneath? Looking for that gap, that space between the label and the reality, is one of the most powerful thinking tools you can have.